Hello, everyone. I'm Bernice Genevieve, Deputy Registrar with the University of Atlantia, and welcome to our Instructor Spotlight series. This session, we will have Lord Dáire Ó Lochliann joining us from the wonderful Kingdom of Avakal and also from the Shire of Aresgard. Um, this year we have a theme of the known world and also of the natural world. So we are happy to have people from uh, all over the known world joining us. Um, Back in the second year of the pandemic, we were lucky enough that Lord Dáire found us and started taking classes and teaching classes online with us here at a University of Atlantia. And all of his classes have just been really, really well received. So with that, he's going to be expanding on a previous class on agriculture in early Ireland and focusing on beekeeping. So let me switch over the spotlight and we will hand it off to him. Looks
Okay,
good to me.
so as Genevieve said, my name is Dáire Ó Lochliann. I'm from the Shire of Aresgard in the Kingdom of Avakal. Shire of Aresgard, we are the farthest west point in the Kingdom of Avakal. We are literally, I can look out my bathroom window and I'm looking at the Canadian Rockies. We are um, on the east, sorry, the western side of the Canadian Rockies. So Antier sometimes thinks we belong to them, but no, we're definitely Avakal. Um, as Genevieve suggested, this class has grown out of the agriculture in early Ireland, where honey and mead get mentioned briefly, and somebody said, "Oh, do you know anything about beekeeping in early Ireland?" And I said, "No, but I'll buy the book." So I'm not an apiarist. I'm not a bee guy. So I'm sure there will be some apiarists and bee people in the crowd who know more about the technical side of bees. And in the question and answer, I may lean on them for more information. Um, what we're going to be looking at is the old Irish bee judgments, and then a very, very brief poke at some of the genetics of the modern Irish bee, but predominantly looking at the Irish bee judgments, which are an old Brehon law text. So let's move on. As a point of context, this is the Roman Empire, kind of the maximum limits around 117 AD. And up in that corner, you'll notice a red circle around Hibernia. That is our Irish island. And at no point was the island subject to Roman rule, which means Latin didn't really infiltrate the way it did through the rest of Europe. Which leaves us with a unique situation where a lot of the early texts are actually in the vernacular. Uh, Ireland probably has the largest collection of vernacular manuscripts of any country, any European country. I'm sure somewhere in the East, Persia probably has some good collections of Arabic works. But for us up here in Ireland, we didn't begin using Latin until the monastic period, so definitely post 450. And even then, it was interesting in that a lot of things were translated into Irish as they were written, as opposed to being translated straight to Latin and put to paper. So that's just a bit of context. We'll start with Saint Bridget, just a modern iconography of her. She's a goddess of poetry, fertility. Um, I say goddess of fertility because I'm not sure the church would like me to talk of a saint of fertility. And there's a relationship to the bees there. Um, she's also a goddess or saint of healing, and honey is a medicinal product as much as it is a caloric product in the early period. And she's connected to smiths. So if we look here in the corner, we can see this fire bowl that she's carrying, and that is linked by some to her patronage of the Smiths. Saint Gonate. This is her. This is a detail of the pattern for the stained glass. I don't think this is actually the stained glass itself. And this is the Honan Chapel in the university in County Cork. There's talk of a raid at Ballyvarney, and St. Gonate lifts a beehive, and while she's praying for safety, the bees then swarm, chase away the thieves, and save the cattle. Most of us are familiar with the cattle raids of Cooley, one of the grand old tales of Ireland. But the cattle were cash. Most things were translated into cattle value. So to protect your cattle was to protect the wealth of the family, or the extended family, or the mini kingdom. And there's not a lot of information on the hagiography of Saint Gonate and how she was sanctified. And essentially, it's this miracle of saving the cattle is um, her primary raison d'etre in the world of Irish saints. And her time period is roughly 500 current era. And in the glass work here, we can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bees. And if we look at her dress, it's honeycomb. We've got the six-sided shapes, the hexagonal honeycomb shapes. So definitely, this artistry was done about 1914. The early 20th century, there was this quite strong connection to the bees with this saint. So how did the bees get to Ireland? Saint Modonnic left Wales for Ireland, and he was a beekeeper in Wales. He was a monastic beekeeper, and was very polite and pleasant with his bees, always chatting with them and telling them stories and asking them how they're doing. And so when he left for Ireland, they thought, well, this is a nice man, let's go with him. And this occurred around 525. When we talk about the telling the bees, if there's been a marriage or a death or a birth, anything significant in the community, you always have to go tell the bees, because they're an important part of the family as well. So they need to know everything that's going on. And the rumor is, if you don't keep them up to date on things and they find out later, then they'll abandon you. So you have to tell the bees. Now, this circa 525 CE, we have a question mark on that, because this is when bees arrived, yet the previous saint, 25 years earlier, is related to bees, so there must have been bees there for her. And if we go back to Saint Bridget slash Bridget the Goddess, we're going into early Iron Age, if not back into Bronze Age. So if we have these bee laws being put into text form, coming off a traditional oral spoken tradition, that was a bit circuitous. It strikes me as odd that they didn't arrive till 525, when there's easily a 2,000-year history. So we have a little bit of the church trying to take control of this agricultural practice. So we have the Bepreitha, the bee judgments. It's Brehon law, which is Druidic law or oral tradition. Rudolf Turnison, Swiss-born German scholar, early 20th century. one of the first people to do a good job of translating this from the Gaelic into German initially. A gentleman named Daniel Anthony Binchy, D.A. Binchy, he was originally primarily an ambassador from Ireland and the UK, pre-UK days, but UK, who went over to mainland Europe and during some of his diplomatic work actually met Thurnesson. And that's how Binchy in the mid 20th century learned of and learned of the bee judgments, but also learned how to translate the Gaelic, and then we finally had the Gaelic into English, which we in our modern idiom in North America certainly are tied very strongly to our English. Just one little page from it, Folio 24A. Just an idea of how beautiful the Little Bee Judgments book is. The edition we're looking at is the one published by the School of Celtic Studies, Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, and from the Early Irish Law series. And it intrigued me that it was volume 1 of this series. And Thomas Charles Edwards is the editor, and winner of tonight's most Irish name, Fergus Kelly, is the other editor. The original was 1983. 2008, they expanded very slightly. I believe Appendix 6 is all they really added that's extra. So very, very little extra information in the 2008 version. And 2019 and 2020, it's been reprinted, and that's the version that I was working from. I like to do this with texts that have a bit of a history in case somebody finds a digital version of, say, the 1993 edition. If they're working through the 1983 edition, they may have minor differences from what I'm presenting because I'm working from a later document. This one in particular is really just that Appendix 6, which is maybe 4 or 5 pages. That's the real change, so no big deal. Why do we have the bee judgments when we have an old Irish law tract on neighboring farms? Why are they not included as part of the farm stock? Again, Thomas Charles Edwards was the primer editor on this. Moving up to book 9 of the law series, looking at all the law books there, this is one of the ones I would have thought would have been very early, but it's not. It's quite late, 2022. Big old book. What's TLDR? Too long, didn't read. Yeah. So 2 sentences to describe the 496 pages. Good fences make good neighbors. And what is to be done when those fences break down? And that's essentially what the entire book is. But in very, very, very fine detail. When I say fences break down, that can either be natural causes. A tree blows down, breaks a fence. The bull sees a fine-looking cow in the next field and goes through the fence and visits the neighbors. Or it could be intentional tampering. Somebody is looking to do a bit of cattle raiding and takes a fence down. So how the fence breaks down is part of the process of determining penalty. So, long-winded introduction. We are now finally to our bees. And the answer to why the bees aren't in the farm animals is bees do not abide by fences. So when you put up a fence, the bees just don't care. When I did a Google search for images for bee fences, this image, elephants stealing bees in Africa and bears stealing bees in North America and Europe, that's as close as you get to bee fences. It's to stop others getting to the bees, not to stop the bees getting out and about. We only have one complete extant copy. It's referred to as manuscript 1316. When they start getting into the textual analysis and comparing fragments from other copies, they generally talk about it being 15A. They talk about it being the A copy. And this is held at the Trinity College Dublin Library. Wikipedia seems to think the manuscript is 1387. I'm pretty sure it's 1316. Generally thought to be created around 1350. So a document that has gone through many iterations by the time we have a full extant copy. If anywhere during this text I put down C-E and K, that's Charles Edwards and Kelly. So Thomas and Fergus. So page 1, they right off the bat tell us roughly 1350. Sections 31 and 32 of the Bee Judgments refer to the blinding of Conall Caic in 637. And this is sort of backed up by information in the annals. So this is a pretty solid date that can be found in the early manuscripts. Looking at the language itself in the text, particularly around these two sections, the original text, there's quite a lot of archaic word structure that comes forward to us in the 1350 edition. So the argument is that this text was probably written right around the time of this this event with King Conall. And that one of the reasons this information about King Conall is in there is to emphasize his change to the law at that time. So this date of 637 is quite pivotal in the birth of this document as a written document. We go to textual analysis. So we have a nice little diagram here. If we go to the far left, we have what would be version A. This isn't of the Bee Judgment text. This is just an exemplar of how these sort of things work. As we drift farther to the right, we're moving forward in time, and you've got a multitude of different versions of a manuscript or fragments of a manuscript, and you can link them together and say, oh, these two had a shared common ancestor. These two had a shared, and work backwards, and they can kind of figure out which is the original text, but they can also figure out if that text is missing. So in our case, we actually do have 15A, our original full copy, and then 11 fragmentary Bee Judgment texts. And they confirm that the missing earliest source is roughly mid-7th century. So this is a third way they can anchor the dating. So that sort of 630, 650 date seems pretty solid. We'll get into the text proper. If you have bees or you start a new bee hive, and I use the term hive in air quotes, I'll get to that later. You need to forepledge to your neighbors. You need to say to your neighbors, I will guarantee you 2 sets value of something, sets being a monetary value tied to the value of cattle. We as the beehive holder will hold that for you, or it'll be held in community for you if anything goes wrong with my hives and causes problems. One of the most, and this is from the text itself, most difficult among forepledges is a forepledge for bees. The forepledge goes to the land which is nearest to them on every side, the 2 sides and the 2 headlands of the land, for trespass, injury, or earnings. So trespass refers more to the grazing. The bees are considered to graze when they go foraging for their nectar. Injury predominantly stings, but as we've seen with King Conall, the blinding is an issue. And the earnings is about when the bees swarm and a new hive is established, a new source of honey and wax is established. They generate profits. So there's this tracking of the swarms, so that you get your proper earnings from the new hives. So that's kind of the premise of the whole set of bee judgments. So we'll poke our way through and see what more detail we can come up with. Nearest neighbors. In theory, we have the blue block in the middle. We have one on either side, and we have the top and tail, the two headlands. And that's how it's described in the text. In reality, you kind of got that mess. This obviously is much later in Ireland, because you see parish registers. But it's these odd-shaped bits of land are what we're truly talking about. So when we talk nearest neighbors, it can get quite squishy. It's not as concrete as the theory would imply. When you have a new hive, you're given a 3-year period of immunity. And when you say bee owner, they don't talk about bee owners per se. They talk more about the person who possesses the land upon which the hive exists. So a bee owner is someone who owns land that has a hive. They have immunity from trespass, so their bees are free to graze locally, and free from earnings. So other people can't really profit in the first 3 years from the activities of that new hive. However, they're not immune from the due of reparation or the desire of sickness. The due of reparation would be injury, and we'll talk about that in detail later. Desire of sickness, if you have a productive hive and one of your neighbors falls ill, there's sort of a community or familial obligation to assist in their recovery. And honey as a medicine is uh, part of that community sharing. So when there's the desire of sickness, someone is sick and they desire the honey, generally you will pass that on. The limit of trespass. How far can the bees go? As far as a cow reaches on pasture until milking time. So roughly how far a milk cow will travel in a day is what they assume is an equivalent distance to where the bees graze. There's very limited evidence they fully understood how far bees went to graze. So in the 4th year, the hive owner becomes obligated to a form of profit sharing. So at this point, the hive should be established. The bee owner should know what they're doing, and new swarms coming from his hive are now owed in debt to his neighbors. And this is generally by nearest neighbor, so geographical, physical nearness, but can also be kind of tweaked based on kindred bonds. So if there's two farmsteads equidistant, the one which you are most familial to is the one that will get it first, get the new swarm first. Sections 11 to 16 readdress some of the tree and water laws. So if we go back to the law tracks on neighboring farms, they talk about tree ownership and trees violating borders, water violating grazing passage and things like that. Part of it's to protect the quality of the water, part of it's to protect the grazing rights of an animal. So they take these previous laws and they associate these laws to trees that hold hives. And that's why it struck me as odd that the bee judgments were done first in this translation series in Ireland, because obvious from the way these bee judgments refer to other law books, that the other law books were there first. So me being a very linear thinker, I would have done the first law text first and then built from there. But it may be that because the bee judgments was very small, they thought they'd test the theory and generate that text without massive expenditure. Also associates the law to water barriers that may impinge on grazing. Streams weren't really an issue, but ponds could take up a lot of ground surface, and that could disrupt the grazing of the bees. And there's penalties for harming trees. I won't go into them too much because we're less interested in the trees, we're more interested in the bees. But the trees themselves are very well protected. So in the tree laws, in the neighboring farm laws, there's fruit spoils, not fruit that has spoiled and gone rotten, but fruit spoils as in spoils of war. So if we imagine this, can we see my mouse moving? If we imagine this line to actually be a fence, all of the fruit that is left of center, if it falls, it's falling into the neighbor's yard. So the neighbor has certain rights to those fruit, despite the tree being rooted to the far right in the primary owner's field. So these fruit spoils are quite easy to sort out because this is where the fence is, this is where the fruit falls. And there's a sharing that goes on. 50% of the fruit on one side always goes with the person who owns the land. Where the fruit has fallen, 50% always returns back to the owner of the tree from which it has fallen. So there's this long-term sharing. And in order to not allow the owner of the tree to cut the branches off and therefore not allow fruit to fall in a neighbor's yard, that the trees are protected from that sort of thing. And that's why there's this sharing of the fruit, because we want to protect the trees as long as we can. Don't want to stop lopping off branches and introducing infection and things like that. So let's move forward. We're still in gratuity. We're still in this how do we get how do we pay back the debt, that 3-year debt for our original bee ownership to our neighbors. So my bees, for example, swarm to your tree. For the first 3 years, we will split any produce from that new hive between us, a nice even split. After the 3 years, it's now your hive in your tree, and I no longer have any rights to any product from there. At that point, fully owned by the tree owner. I think I just said that. Where possible, in the 4th year, I try to direct my swarms to the neighboring properties which have not yet received a stray swarm. And this starts to get quite convoluted. So we will, it's the nearness and family. We'll go back. I'm going to avoid that slide. Come here. So back to our original slide. Is there a question I need to answer, Genevieve? Or can we wait till the end on it?
You can wait till the end.
Okay. So sharing the swarms. We're back to our original hive A and our 4 neighboring properties. For some reason, in my first 3 years, at some point, one swarm went to the neighbors and established hive B. That person now has a hive, and they have their 2 side-by-side neighbors and their headland top and tail neighbors. So we now have this cluster. And you can see that A and B overlap with each other as sort of shared properties in the color scheme. So swarm B was a swarm that kind of escaped my property and set up in the neighbors. That person was a neighbor I should have given bees to eventually anyways after my 3-year immunity. So A1, A2, A3, and then B would have been A4, um, were my obligations to share out my swarms in the future. Um, hive B is already there, so I only have to deal with A1, A2, and A3 in my fourth year of hive ownership, because I've now finished my 3-year immunity, and now I'm in repayment of the debt. And the repayment of the debt is essentially through establishing hives on the neighbor's properties. So I hope that kind of starts to make something like that sentence. Where possible in the fourth year, I direct my swarms to a neighboring property which has not yet received a stray swarm. That's what I was trying to clear up there. Um, that purple is the stray swarm, the red is their obligations in the future. A1, A2, A3 are my obligations in my fourth year. So generally in Ireland, they have 3 swarming periods. Um, so in my first 3 years, I kind of want to keep those swarms on my property. Some of them may go stray and I can't get them back. But I'm trying to build up my personal honey farm. So in the fourth year, I'm starting to build the neighbors' honey farms, and this is a lot to do with repayment for my bees grazing on their property for these last 3 years. So there is this sense of repayment. Your family neighbor gets the first swarm, and this is the gratis swarm. This is the free swarm. It's the best swarm of the year. The neighbor with the best produce gets the bull swarm. The bull swarm is the second swarm of the year. And there's descriptions of it being quite a drone heavy swarm. And that's why it's called the bull swarm. The logic for giving it to the neighbor with the best produce seems to be twofold. One, if they've got the best produce, they seem to have the best forage for that new swarm, so it's most likely to succeed. But also it may reflect good agricultural care, good husbandry by the landowner. So if you're going to give away bees to a neighbor who's not your family, give it to someone who's going to treat them well and hopefully allow them to survive and prosper. And finally, the third swarm of the year is called the foolish swarm. And it can struggle. So it's kind of the weakest of the year. If we go back to my graphic, the family neighbor gets A1, the bull swarm goes to A2, and the foolish swarm goes to A3. Where we have neighbors of equal quality in their husbandry, they draw lots to see who gets swarm 2. Or if there's familial closeness as well as geographic closeness that's very equal, then there might be drawing of lots to see who gets the swarm 1, the gratis swarm. As such, the fourth neighbor may have to wait until year 5, and we'll get the gratis swarm in year 5. But in the example I put up, where swarm B went across, swarm B has already been given prior, so there wouldn't be a fourth neighbor left over in year 5. My obligations will be complete by the end of year 4. Protecting swarms. There's certain meteorological necessities, weather preferences for swarm hives to swarm and spawn off. And the owner of a given hive will generally put a guard on their hives to protect the hive and the swarm. And as I said, this is where you're a little bit greedy in those first 3 years. If you can control where that swarm goes, if you can keep it on your property, you can get a nice little commercial operation going. When a recipient neighbor, so your A1, your A2, your A3, when they're expecting their swarm, they're responsible for putting a guard out and for tracking that swarm and trying to get the queen to their own hive. So there's at a certain point, my responsibility to you dissipates, and their responsibility to themselves kicks in. Injuries. The owner slash bee is immune from punishment if the person stung is robbing the hive, moving the hive, seizing them when grazing, like just being mean to bees in the field, or overlooking, basically harassing the hive, hanging around the hive, looking at it, just being too close, too soon, too often. If we look at the phrase moving the hive, that is interesting. Oops, I didn't mean to click. That's interesting to me because
Dara,
uh,
before you move on to this real quick,
yeah,
there is a
yeah,
question about the swarms in the what if swarm B plot? So
yes.
so your fourth neighbor already has bees on both sides or all their other sides.
Mm-hmm.
So how is the origin of the swarm determined? Only
Um,
asking because the Irish law seems to have this level of detail.
Part of it is to do with the guards, the protecting the swarms. Um, and later on, I will actually go into a few instances which describe exactly the situation of the question. Um, and if once you get to a point where most of the neighbors have hives, you lose track of who's who. And they do have a solution to dealing with that. So, good question, well asked, and there is an answer deeper in.
Excellent.
Okay. Okay. So if you're messing with the bees and you get stung, that's hard luck. You were being silly. Bees were doing their job, looking after themselves. However, the owner or the bee is liable for reparations if the person stung is doing the bees no harm or illegality. So if I was walking my fence line, checking for apples, and a bee was hanging around and just decided he was going to sting me, the bee's responsible. I was doing nothing wrong. I was being a good husbandman and looking after my property and my fruit trees. The reparation would generally be you give the guy enough honey to keep him quiet. Just make him cheerful. Unless the person who was stung has killed the bee, at which point um, the reparation is the killing of the bee, and you get that with cattle, you get that with dogs, you get that with pigs, you get that with people. The ultimate reparation is your dog kills my dog, so I kill your dog. Um, but we have an issue. Honeybees generally die from the act of stinging. You got a good old stinger here with some good old hooks. Those hooks bite in, and as you either brush the bee off or the bee flies away, they leave a lot of their innards behind and will die from this. So there's your stinger. This is where the image came from. It's in the reference list at the end if anyone wants to track that down. Uh, so there does seem to be a bit of a um, um, protection for the bee and the bee owner. Uh, if you kill my bee, we're even. Well, the bee's going to die anyways, so we are even. So the person who's stung doesn't seem to have a lot of clout when these discussions come up. Injuries, in the particular of blinding. If it be an eye which it has blinded, it is then the injury requires the casting of lots on all the hives. Whichever of the hives it falls upon is forfeit for the bee's offense. So somebody gets blinded by a bee, this is a big deal. And we don't know where this bee came from. So we kind of know it with those neighbors. So we draw lots, and whichever hive is attached to the lot drawn, that um, that hive is destroyed. If it's a case where there's lots of hives around, it could be 3 or 4 or 5 land holdings where the lots are drawn against. So it could have been B from AB from hive A that did the sting, but it might be from farm B that the hive is destroyed. But if it happens very infrequently, tough luck. If it happens more frequently, then you've got a sort of an equity imbalance in the community. And I think the only reason this one is in there is because Connell the One-Eye passed this as a special law for obvious reasons. With a name like Connell the One-Eyed, and he's making bee laws, he obviously had a sting to the eye area that left him blinded. And this ties back to what I said earlier about this date of 637. You've got this insertion of sections 30 to 33 specifically about Connell and this addition to the laws, which gives some anchoring to the date of when these were written. It certainly couldn't have been written before this because the event hadn't occurred. Multitude. Okay. Previous slide, we have whichever the hives it falls upon is forfeit for the bee's offense. In earlier laws, particularly the neighboring farms laws, um, the crowd can be held responsible. The multitude can be responsible. So if you find a dead chicken amongst a pack of dogs, you draw lots to see which of that pack of dogs is done for. If you have a drove of pigs that get a hold of somebody else's livestock, if you get a person that gets trampled in a field of cattle, but you don't know which cow did the actual trampling, it's and humans, you have a riot, there's been a killing. You either hold the entire multitude responsible and possibly eliminate them all, or you draw lots and somebody, one dog, one cow, one person, um, it is held responsible and is dealt with. Earnings. So here we start to track the swans. If the swarms, if we track a swarm and it settles on the land of a dignitary, 1/3 of the produce goes to the owner of the original swarm, only if they also acted as the tracker. 1/3 goes to the landowner, the dignitary, and if there's a distance between the two, 1/3 can be shared to the intervening property owner or owners. So it might be 1/6 to 2 property owners or 1/9 to 3 property owners intervening. So there's a sense of equity being maintained. Where the tract swarm settles on the land of a commoner, 1/3 to the original owner, 1/3 to the new owner, and 1/3 to the non-owning tracker. So if somebody sees the swarm and tracks it down and says, okay, I didn't own the original swarm or the original hive, but I tracked it from point A to point B. And because I've announced it to the new owner kind of is giving me part of their share for bringing it to the attention of the landowner. The where the new owner is the tracker and the new owner is, sorry, where the old owner is the tracker and the new owner um, uh, obviously owns a new hive, there's a 50-50 split. And this goes straight back to section 17 to 19, where we had that original 50-50 split in the swarm A, swarm B, hive A, hive B situation. And this, I believe, answers the question that was asked. Where there is confusion of swarms and the original owner cannot be determined, 50% goes to the new owner, where the new landowner, and 50%, the remaining 50% is shared between kind of the most likely landowners, other neighbors, where that swarm may have come from. So where it can't be determined, there again, there's this sense of equity, trying to make it fair for all. Okay, so the man who finds a stray swarm on a lawful green claims 1/4 of the produce for 1 year, and the other 3/4 goes to the owner of the green. So a lawful green is the area around somebody's homestead within which you can hear the crowing of cockerel or the sound of a bell. And we almost have the pre-monastic and post-monastic here. The crowing of the cockerel, pre-monastic, the sound of the bell, post-monastic. And when we think of a church bell, we think of that big thing up in the top of the steeple. A lot of the church bells early on were handheld, so they did not have that distance of sound that the one up in the steeple did. So to link it to the sound of a cockerel crowing, perhaps is quite a legitimate range. Okay, so these bees here were found on the green. They hadn't yet established where they were going to put their hive. So the owner will have gone out. Well, the tracker will have said, I found some bees. The owner will then go out and try and encourage them to a potential tree to set up the hive. That's why it's a 1/4, 3/4 split. The owners had to do some work to get those bees to settle. If the man finds bees within a tree on a lawful green, and he doesn't tell the owner, but then goes back a year later and finally tells the owner, oh yeah, by the way, you've got bees in your tree. The tracker gets half of the produce, and the owner gets half of the produce. And there seems to be a bit of a penalizing of the landowner, because there's been a hive there for a year and he hasn't noticed it. He hasn't been a good husbandman. He hasn't been checking his land appropriately. But there also seems to be a weird reward to somebody who's hiding the fact that he knows those bees are there. That isn't addressed in the documentation. I'm sort of thinking, yeah, maybe don't reward him, maybe scold him for not mentioning the bees are there. But he moves up to a 50% share rather than his original 1/4. More earnings. So swarms found beyond the green. So we're getting out beyond the immediate vicinity of the farmstead. 1/3 to the finder, the tracker, 2/3 to the landowner. If we move away further still into a forest, unshared land, or inaccessible country, that hive is immune from the predations of anyone else. That is 100% yours. And when I say forest, forest is too simple for me to say. It's a Norman French concept, but the forest is the land designated, or the wooded land designated for the use of the royals. In this case, there were no royals, true royals, in our understanding. There's many minor kings and kingdoms in Ireland at this time, but there's no big kings. Like there's no Richard the Lionhearted. There's no William the Conqueror. So that if you find that beehive far enough away, it's basically yours. All goes to the finder except where 1/3 of 1/3, so 1/9, might go to a familial obligation or to a church bequest. And again, church. The church had nothing to do with these Brehon laws until they wrote them down. So that church there is a monastic addition to the Brehon law. The Druidic tradition would not have recognized this bequest to the church. It didn't exist yet. So it's interesting to see how the church is slowly wedging their way into the laws, even when they're supposedly just writing them down. Theft. If bees or produce of the hive are stolen when that is located in a courtyard or garden, they're considered to have been taken from the home. So the courtyard, the garden, and the home are somewhat sacrosanct. Full penalty of law for this type of theft, full honor price paid. And this is generally up to 7-fold the value of the theft. And again, we've got this idea of a mobile hive. It's tough to steal a tree, but it's pretty easy to steal a wicker hive, a wicker skep. So even here in the theft, you've got this monastic inclusion of this concept of mobile hives. Sorry, my dog is eating something he shouldn't be. Let go. Come on, buddy. Never own a husky. They're the worst. Yeah, so hives are being reported as mobile objects, reported as man-made objects, and this is monastic beekeeping. This is not traditional Irish beekeeping. So when I say hives, obviously modern image here, but this is kind of what the early Irish would have thought of as hives. You have bees that have gone into the cleft of a tree and set up home. If there was any husbandry, any apiary craft going on, they may have noticed, oh, that tree's got bees in it. That tree's got a crack. Let's open that up a bit more. See if the bees will go into the bigger house. So there's a little bit of evidence of trees being worked before they were felled. And one argument is this is what's happening. This, I believe, is fairly modern, but is an example of traditional hives. I believe this is in the Ukraine. I would guess this would be pre communalization in the communist period. These either have survived or are replicas. This again, very similar to what we see here. And this, I think, is in the northeast of the United States, and picture could have been taken a week ago. So some of this traditional Eastern European hive type, the hollow tree, is being replicated currently in the US. So we're not talking about the nice wickerwork beehives or the clay domes that come with the monastic period. Theft. If the produce or the bees themselves or the hive is stolen in the green, full penalty of law, full honor price paid as if they'd stolen a large animal, an adult cow, adult pigs, maybe up to 4-fold the value of the theft. If it's stolen outside the green, full penalty of law, full honor price paid as if for a small animal. A piglet or a calf or sheep or goat, and usually twofold the value of the theft. So there seems to be a sense of propriety. The closer you go to the home, the greater the offense. Um, if tracked bees okay, so somebody is tracking bees. They've settled somewhere, and somebody then um, steals the queen, so they can now establish a hive with that queen and swarm. Um, if they do that, so the bees are, they generally describe it as either being on a branch or on a fence or on a white sheet. So there's a sense of being able to lay a linen sheet or a woolen sheet out in the sun, and that somehow that attracts the bees to it. And this is one way that they, when somebody's expecting to receive a swarm, they'll often use this white sheet as a landing pad so they can help control where the swarm goes. At best, they lose their usual finder share. So 1/4, 1/3, 1/2 of the produce, if they've stolen them before they've gone to a hive. If they at worst, they might in fact have to pay what they should have had as their finder share out of their own produce, or an equivalent fine paid to the landowner. And it seems to be whether you get the worst or the best treatment, it's how duplicitous, how deceitful you were in hiding the swarm. Um, so it's a bit of the Nixon. The cover up was worse than the crime, and that's a bit what's going on here. It is on this that the bee judgments have been established in Irish law. So here we are at section 55. We have finally reached the end of the law tract itself. In the book, which I've left upstairs, the book is about 280 pages long. The actual 55 sections in the original Gaelic maybe take up 10% of that. The rest of it is interpretation, well, commentaries and glosses from the 14th to the 16th century, but also later interpretations and processing of it and history of it. So it's a tiny little law book with a lot of explanations around it. What time are we at, Genevieve?
We are 5 after the hour,
Oh,
but you are fine.
oh, okay, okay. My apologies to anyone who has to run away. I will not be offended if you have earlier commitments. So we're going to move to the genetics very quickly. True Irish bees. Apis mellifera mellifera is the dark European honeybee, which is considered to be sort of the root stock of honeybees in Western Europe, the British Isles, Ireland. Most of the populations throughout Europe are heavily hybridized. There's almost no pure mellifera mellifera left. Ireland, if we think back to that picture of the Roman world, very beginning, first slide, there was that little red circle with Hibernia up in the distance that never got the Romans. Because of that, the bees up there that went in the 5th, 6th, 7th century with the monastics, they've remained quite pure on the island. And it's argued that they probably have the largest unhybridized pure mellifera mellifera in Ireland compared to anywhere in Europe. And that's from Hassett in 2018. Again, anyone I reference should be in my list at the end. Resistant Irish bees. I was born in Dáire in Northern Ireland, and So my parents were there during the Troubles. So when I see resistant Irish bees, I've got an image of the IRA and the paratroops from the other side, um, the bees dressed as them. Just my brain goes odd places sometimes. Um, Certain populations of the Mellifera mellifera in Ireland are showing very good resistance to the Varroa destructor mites. Um, and whether that's due to the purity, the non-hybridized uh, state of the gene pool in Ireland, they're not sure. This is particularly prevalent around Dublin, and my brain reading the paper says, is that because Dublin's on the east coast? It's most likely to be the first point of contact and contamination, and that's so they're seeing it there first. It's only been observed there. Or is there something special about the Dublin bees? I'm suspecting right now that it's a lack of research across the country, which is why they're saying this Dublin pocket is so special. I think it is probably genetic and it's anywhere on the island, but it still needs to be looked at. This is McMullen, again, 2018. Back to the wild Irish bees. Unlike mainland Europe and Britain, the Mellifera mellifera still has quite a wide population outside of commercial honey farms. Anywhere else in Europe, you don't really find them in your local tree hollow. They're either on the farm or they're not around. And I'm going to say I'm going to say Western Europe. Eastern Europe, they probably still do have some more free living bees. These bees are showing good hardiness, good resistance to disease, good resistance to temperature variation compared to commercial bees. So there's a thought about using them to reinvigorate commercial stocks. That's in 2020. So we can see there's we've identified these good bees. Now let's make use of these good bees. We go back to the true Irish bees, and in the 6 years from Hassett, significant hybridization has occurred in some areas of Ireland due to the importation of queens from abroad. So within 6 years, they've already bastardized this pure source that they were hoping to use to strengthen bee stock. So you just got to shake your head. And this is McCann and McCormick in 2024. So like I say, from 2018 to 2024, 6 years, and already they're making a mess of it. Thank you, everybody, for your time and interest. My apologies for going over. It's first time I've taught this one. So I'm still coming to terms with the quantity of information there. I will stop sharing at this point so that I can see smiling faces.